and they got so much opposition that they had to leave the town. At least a couple of them left Philippi, maybe all four of them. And then they went on to Thessalonica, and which was about 100 miles. And 100 miles doesn't seem like very much, but when you consider they were probably walking, it's a little ways. And when you consider that they, at least Paul and Silas, Silvanus, Paul always referred to him as Silvanus. Luke always referred to him as Silas. If you look at all the readings, it'll be really interesting. Every time Paul talks about him, he says Silvanus. Every time Luke talks about him, he calls him Silas. But Paul and Silas were in prison there in Philippi, and so that probably made that 100-mile journey a little bit more painful, a little bit more difficult for them. And so that those are just some things to think about. Then they stayed when he got to Philippi. They were at the and we gain this information from the writings in Acts. And I had mentioned a long time ago, I thought it would be kind of fun to go through the book of Acts, and every time you get to a spot where one of the other books was written, go and do that book, and then come back to where you left off in Acts, and so that, because I like history, and putting all of that into place in the book of Acts would be really helpful to us in our understanding and getting what was going on. So they spent a couple months in Philippi, then went on to Thessalonica. When they first got there, they spent 3 weeks. The first 3 Sabbaths, Paul actually spoke in the synagogue. And we get that information from Acts, but that's about as long as it worked out. He started talking too much about the Messiah has come, and you haven't met him yet. And his name is Jesus, and you can meet him. But the opposition started to build up, and we know he stayed there quite a while for a lot of reasons. First of all, Paul engaged, he got into gainful employment. So, and you don't do that in just 3 weeks. So we know he stayed in Thessalonica longer than 3 weeks, because you don't start a business and start making money in under 3 weeks. So and we know it was longer than 3 weeks because when he left Thessalonica, he left a thriving church. He left a really strong church, and you can see that in a lot of different points in the writing. And before leaving, Paul received at least 2 gifts from the church in Philippi. Even though he was only at Philippi 2 months, there were enough people in Philippi that got saved that started sending gifts to Paul to help him in Thessalonica. And it's 100 miles, so to receive 2 gifts from them, that would take more than just a couple of weeks. So he had a lot of converts in Thessalonica. It was a great opportunity. It was a good deal. And during that time, Timothy had come and was actually sent back to Philippi to kind of help pastor the church there and lead it. So those are things that just some background. And so then the second, whoops, sorry. And I mentioned that it was probably the earliest of his letters. And also the next thing is after the background is authorship and the date that it was written. Well, pretty much, we realize the author from the very first verse. Paul says, he says this, Paul, and in the King James Version, I think it says Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy. In the NIV, it says Paul, Silas, and Timothy. And But Paul is really the main author, and he is just giving credit to these other two guys for being there with them, walking with them, and the fact that they are also they're standing behind everything that Paul is writing in this. But Paul's the author, and as you look at it, we can look at several things from history, and we find out that he probably wrote the book in the spring of AD 50. And the reason we think that is because he talks about in different places. In Acts 18, he talks about Gallio being the proconsul of Asia, and we can go back into Roman history, and we can figure out exactly when Gallio started his work as proconsul of that area of Asia. You can look at history, and you can line up all of these things and figure it out. And then some of the other events that are written about in Acts and in First Thessalonians, as you start to meld those events together, you come up with probably spring of AD 50 when this was written. And I don't really necessarily want to go into a whole bunch of that, but it has to do with when it even has to do with when he left Corinth, and we know how long he stayed in Corinth. Corinth was after Thessalonica. And so you can go backwards on that. You can go forwards on the proconsul from Gallio and our proconsul of Asia, Gallio, and those different things like that, and you arrive at this date. And also, there were news. There was another factor was there was news about all the Christians in Thessalonica that it had already spread far and wide how many believers there were in Thessalonica. And so this keeps going, and each of these things, so you can kind of see how that all comes together and gives that. And so and then I wrote occasion and purpose, but I don't know. The occasion was Timothy's report. Really, the whole reason for writing Thessalonians, the first book of Thessalonians, or the first letter to the Thessalonians, was in response to Timothy's report from there. And when he came back another time, he brought news to Paul and from Thessalonica, because Paul is writing this back after he spent a lot of time at Thessalonica. He's writing it from the next town, and Timothy was giving him this report and saying, okay, this is happening really good. This is okay, and this is not so good, and all this stuff is going on. And so the reason that he wrote it, once again, same thing with Colossians. He wrote the report because he wrote a letter to the Colossians because he was getting word that this was happening, different things were happening in the church at Colossae. Same thing here. He's finding out that people are saying stuff, different things going on. People are challenging Paul's authority. There's just all kinds of stuff happening. And kind of reminds us that if you're working for Jesus, you're probably going to have some sort of opposition's going to come. And Paul faced it. Seems like Paul faced it everywhere he went. And then he even faced it. We're going to lose it again, I think. He even faced it after he left those places. People would still come out and cause problems and say stuff even after he left. They would challenge it. So I was trying to remember who wrote the song. I could have. Must be doing something right. I've got the devil real uptight. Back in the 70s, was one of those Christian artists that was out there. I enjoyed listening to whoever it was. Man, I can't think of who it was. But that was the song. Must be doing something right because I got the devil real uptight. And he knew when he was making Satan mad because he was facing opposition, and so he felt like he was on the right track. And so Paul must have been on the right track because he was always getting opposed by Satan. And so he wrote this after Timothy came back. He wanted to give encouraging words to the Thessalonians because of their spiritual stamina. There was a report of efforts to undermine Paul's reputation, question his sincerity there, which is kind of weird because he pretty much worked his way through Thessalonica. He never asked that church for anything. He worked the whole time he was there to take care of himself, and their people are questioning his sincerity. There was confusion and discouragement regarding the Lord's return and the part of what was going to happen with people who had passed away. So um, so these were things he was answering. And remember last week I said I was kind of excited about getting to 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. The reason for that is because when the end times, the rapture is talked about in 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5. And that's the reason that I'm looking forward to getting several chapters into this book, because we're looking forward to the return of Jesus. And Paul was already looking forward to the return back, I think. Okay, I think you're here. I hope so. Three are back. Sorry about this. And nothing I can do about it, though, except just keep on trying here. I don't know how we're going to upload this to the existing in three persons. We're back, sort of. We'll see. Another doctrine is the deity of Jesus Christ, which is a real important doctrine. Our motivation and other areas. And also, by example, he teaches lessons in this book on discipleship or on discipling others. But by far the biggest doctrine or theological value is the words that he gives on eschatology towards the end of the book, because he actually spends some time there. And man, we've got the most people so far watching. We got 6 people signed on, and so that's awesome. So there's a whole bunch of themes that are there, and finally, after all that and coming back and forth, there's several things he talks about. Actually, the coming or the presence of Jesus and the revelation of Jesus. God's wrath is talked about at the end of the book, and it's the wrath on people not serving him. Not every single one of them, but almost all of them start out this way. Um, it, and this was the way letters started in his time. And in fact, if you write a business letter today, you usually put your business, who it's from. Now if you get a personal letter in our day and time, it at the beginning of it just says who it's to, and you have to go clear to the end to find out who it's from. That's where it's signed. And so and it's kind of funny because if you read it without knowing who it's from, that kind of takes away a whole bunch of context of the situation. You don't know. You're reading this letter and you're going, man, who is saying this stuff to me? Unless you recognize the handwriting or you know. But on a business letter, a form business letter, it has a big letterhead and the company name, and usually actually the individual has their name right there at the top of it, and then it starts through, and so you have that context. And And remember, we've talked about this before. One of the most important things that we have, there's two things in Bible interpretation, and they're so closely related that I don't even know how to separate them. You interpret it literally, and you interpret it in context. You interpret it in context, and you interpret it literally. And so Paul is trying to give context to this letter, and he's saying it's from him, with Silas and Timothy putting their stamp of approval on it. It is to the church of the Thessalonians, and this is and he specifies who this church is. So it contains this contains the writer, the recipient, and then the greetings or the salutation, the proper salutation. So, but let's look at Paul, Silas, and Timothy. We know who Paul is. We've seen a whole bunch of his letters. We've looked at a lot of his letters, and he sends that authority. Silas, as I mentioned before, Paul usually says Silvanus. Things we see that Paul said, and he was highly esteemed among the Jerusalem Christians in Acts 15. You see that Silas had their, they cared, and he was inclined toward the Hellenistic wing of Palestinian Christianity. In other words, he believed Greeks could be saved, and or Gentiles, as you know, depending on how you look at it. He believed they could be saved, and that's an important thing, and that's why Paul took him along on this journey, because they were heading into areas where they were going to meet people that were not Jews, and they were going to reach out to Jews and Gentiles alike. Like Romans, what does it say? Is it Romans 1:16 that says to the Jew first and also to the Greek? that they were taking the message to. He was a Roman citizen, and Paul. This is one where this is the very first place, and he doesn't waste any time getting there. He gets there right away in the very first verse and wants everybody to know that Jesus is God and the deity of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so he wastes no time getting there. And then he finishes with this official greeting, grace and peace. Well, grace, of course, is we can't get enough of God's grace, right? Because the unmerited benefits that are given by God to believers. There's that word unmerited. There's just no other way to. I don't think there's any other way to describe grace. And if you don't understand, well, merit means you earned it, and so unmerited means you didn't earn it, and it actually, grace actually means you can't earn it. You can't earn this. It is so in Ephesians when he says, "For by grace are you saved," and he says that isn't of that peace is amazing. So there we have it, and it's because of that grace and peace we can have this great harmony and enjoy this. There's a good word: inward tranquility. That you can only get from God.
It's like grace is the foundation, and peace is the outworking because of the foundation.
There you go.
Yeah.
Grace is the foundation, and peace is what comes out of that foundation of standing on grace.
You just graced me. Paul's conduct.
So we've been.
Chapter 2:5. And neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness. Now that just answered a question I've had all my life. I've heard people flatter, and I compare, well, because they know what that person's got. That's what I thought. That's a good idea.
So that was, so we actually, in that one verse, I think there's four, if you were going to outline the book of First Thessalonians, there's four sections, and that one verse is one of the four sections. So we got through one quarter of the book tonight. No, just teasing. And sorry for all of those that were online and how you have persevered. There's still 6 people there, according to my deal here. There's still 6 people trying to stay on, and I've had to refresh and come back on. I lost count. I don't even know how many times. So thank you all for being there. If you want to hear the whole thing, I guess you'll have to be here live. You'll have to be here live and be part of this. I don't know how to do it. So we are. I think I might try to figure out a way to run a Ethernet cable. Janice says she's still here. I don't know how much. How much did you get, Janice? Leanne says she's still on. I'll wait a second or two to hear how much they got. So here live, we made it through the first verse, and it was good stuff. I do say so myself. And I thank you again. Thank you for hanging in there. Heidi Stelzer says she's here and there. Heidi's in Alaska, actually. She's our cousin. Nancy, thanks for signing in, Nancy, and hanging in here. I hope all of you could get some semblance of that, because it kept telling me I lost the internet, and I finally gave up and just kept talking. So thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week as we start into verse 2 and get into the heart of the book of to the first book to the Thessalonians. Thanks for being with us tonight. Okay. All right. Janice says she had to click on it a few times, but it seemed to pick up where it left her off. So maybe they got more than I thought they were getting. So thank you all for being here. Have a great week.